This is Jeff Gentry with my Kiwi blog, Communication Across the Ocean. I'm visiting here with Linda Jean Kenix, who is the program coordinator. Is that the title? Department head, basically, and
yeah.
You're the department coordinator.
Yep.
For the Media and Communication Department here at the University of Canterbury. And she's going to have a funny accent because she grew up in the United States of America. And Dr. Kenix earned her PhD from the University of Texas, and she's associate professor here at UC. And previously, she worked in the advertising industry, which I got to learn about a little bit in class the other day. So, Linda Jean Kenix, thank you for being with us today. Tell me, how did you get your start in advertising?
Well, it's interesting that you caught that part of my lecture the other day. Advertising is a small sliver, really, of kind of a more holistic visual communication background. So doing that, I moved into advertising just before I started my academic career. But before that, I was in book publishing and with a newspaper and things like that, but always looking at the visual end of it.
So you worked in layout and things like that?
Did layout for quite some time. Yeah, and then moved more into the kind of creative creation of visual content. But I mean, to me, it's hard to separate when I think about my scholarship and my professional work at the time, and then also teaching professional skills at the university level, because they're so, they're so intertwined. The research you do is based on the work that you do that you're interested in, and then they feed into each other, and so it's hard to say how one led to the other.
Very good.
Yeah.
And so how does advertising and media differ in New Zealand compared to the United States?
Right. Commercially, I think in America it is much more commercially driven in terms of the content and in the organization. Well, I shouldn't even say organization. That's probably not true. But in the content, certainly, there's a huge multi-leveled, multi-layered commercial push in content in the United States. I mean, everything's about selling, right? It's all about selling products, and you see that at every, at storefronts in America in a way that you don't see here. So I would say that consumerism and consumption and those hyper commercialized messages are less so here. I mean, you don't even, we were chatting about billboards,
Right,
I mean, you don't, unless the billboard is, slow down, drive safe. I mean, you really don't see any billboards. Well, you do in Auckland, but not much here in New Zealand, right?
Right,
So,
yeah, we joke in our skit that we did in class that outlandish billboards cause 9% of all highway accidents in America. That's not verified, but it's an argument.
Yeah, I'll go with that. That's a good argument. Yeah. So you don't have that here, and that translates down to what people wear. You don't see a lot of slogans and all this as much. You still see it. Now, in terms of the organization of the media structures themselves, here in New Zealand, there's a big problem that ownership of media here in New Zealand is largely offshore. And I know in America, the argument is solely around conglomeration, right? Principally around conglomeration. Well, here, the issue is conglomeration of international companies that all own every media outlet almost that you can kind of touch in New Zealand. And it's principally Australia, and it's got a big Rupert Murdoch theme around it. But so that's a big concern if you are interested in Kiwi culture and what it means to be a New Zealander and all those big questions. That's a big difference between the two.
Great. Well, that's really good help there. So Auckland seems to dominate television in this country. That's the sense that I get. Whereas in America, we have a lot more local origination, at least in terms of news. So am I right about that? And why is there so little television here, say? Isn't Christchurch, it's as big as Tulsa. Tulsa has about 5 to 7, depending on how you count TV stations. Yeah. Why can't Christchurch have a TV station?
Good question. Yeah, that is a good question. I think it's in large part because the scale of the entire industry, right? So, I mean, even though, yes, Tulsa has an equivalent population, I mean, it's within a much, much larger nation state, right? So, here, New Zealand is 4 million people. So they think, okay, 4 million people, you can service them in one area of specialization, rather than thinking about these kind of state-driven in the United States, but differences at a local level because we are so small, right? And because everybody that lives in Auckland is some way connected to people down here in some way. I mean, there's half a degree of separation between us and them. And so I think that plays a big part of it. We're a small country. But the other bit is the earthquake had a lot to do with it.
Right.
There were more kind of slightly more opportunities. I mean, I'm just thinking about, Campbell Live. Campbell Live, which is our national kind of, what to equivocate it to.
Public affairs show.
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to think of a specific case in point, but I can't. Anyway, it was public affairs show. They used to have a Christchurch hub here with local reporters. And, after the quake, that stopped. And so they all moved up north. And if there's a story down here, they just fly down for it. But as you know, somebody who studies media, that's a different whole set of circumstances in terms of what gets told, how it's told, what kind of knowledge about local issues happens. So it's a really sad state right now.
Right. And of course, Canterbury Television is still trying to get on its feet.
Yep.
But I suppose if they can get on more systems, right, if they can get on broadcast again, digital broadcast and everything, they might do well, because Zeta Joyce told us that when a radio station came back and actually had a local origination, their ratings skyrocketed. So maybe there's room for an entrepreneur to come to Canterbury and do well in television.
There is room for entrepreneurs of all sorts in Canterbury these days. So that would be something I would really hope could change in the near future.
Is there a public broadcast system here the way that we have PBS in America or BBC in England? I don't really see anything like that in television.
No, you wouldn't. Okay, so in television there used to be something called TV7, and that was the closest that pretty much you could get. But it was a distant relative because it still operated under a profit guise. I mean, they had this public service mandate, but they still had to make money in ways that, profit-centered news organizations, have to make money. So it was always problematic from the beginning. But let me just, the short answer is, was it last year? It might have been 2 years ago now. It shut down. I think it was last year. And when that happened, after the fact, which is unfortunate, turns out that all sorts of numbers that the government was using to shut it down were incorrect, which is
a scandal almost.
Yeah, well, it would be if there were some really kind of public journalism, strong-minded folk. I mean, it got some traction in the New Zealand Herald, but it didn't stick as long as I think it should have. That's a huge story, right? But so that's gone now. And I don't see anything coming down the pike that's going to fill its place. And I mean, if you look at content, there was just a study released a couple days ago that you might have seen in the paper that New Zealand is the #1 country in the world per capita for American-based content on television.
Above America?
It is supposedly so. Supposedly so. And I haven't seen the details of that study, but if you Google that in the last couple of days, you'll see it. So that's striking, and that's a major commentary on, the cultural influence that's happening here. And it's an absolute shame,
Right. Now, one thing that I notice that is very unusual to me is on the news, in the morning news, I see these advertorials.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, maybe they exist in America somewhere, but I've never seen one where, imagine Matt Lauer on the Today Show sitting down with an advertiser talking about their product. The same person who's doing journalism, a minute ago and will go back to doing journalism in 1 minute. Now they're sitting on the couch with an advertiser. In the early days of TV, that happened a little bit, but what do you think that maybe does to the reputation of journalists?
Oh, the reputation of journalists is not extremely high in this country, I'll say that. But look, okay, I have a two-pronged answer to that. First prong is, well, that's it. That is exactly what Matt Lauer does on the Today Show. He just doesn't treat it like an advertorial. I mean, there's people that come on all the time, and they're selling their movie. They're selling, whatever product. It might be a conceptual product, but it's a product, So that's happening, right?
Okay.
Even politicians, they're coming on to sell their position. And so, I think that happens at that level. But it is much more explicit and overt here. And it's, the newscaster going, tell us what's great about this newspaper, and you go, oh, gosh, cringeworthy, right? But, so my first argument would be you have it on both sides.
Good.
My second argument, which would not be as positive, is that's part of the denigration of journalism here, right? I mean, it's that journalists haven't made lines in the sand and said, no, we're not doing that. That crosses an objective line of integrity or whatever, whatever you're saying. And part of why they don't do that is because it's a small country and, someone's got to pay the bills and,
right.
And those kinds of economic pressures, coming from America, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and then I was at University of Minnesota. These are big institutions with lots of disposable cash and,
right.
And you see decisions made very differently because of those. That's just an economic truth. When there's more money floating around in different ways, that you make different decisions. So I think that's part of it.
Very good. Well, Linda Jean Kenix has been our guest here on the Kiwi blog, Communication Across the Ocean. Thank you so much for taking time with us.
Thank you.
And then we will be back with another edition of Kiwi blog soon.